Good morning, Judge Chappefoy, Bonjour, and Yate. My name is Stefanie Tsosie, and I am very honored to represent the Bad River Band as a petitioner in this matter. With me as co-counsel are Rob Lundberg and John Petoskey, and I'd like to recognize Chairman Blanchard in the room with us here today. The Bad River Band has been a steward of this land, the surrounding waters, wetlands, rivers, including Mashkazibi herself and Anishinaabe-Gichigami for hundreds of years. In English, those would be the Bad River and Lake Superior. The band relies on the water in this region, surface water, groundwater, seeps, springs, and wetlands for its livelihood. These waters sustain plants and animals that the band harvests for cultural uses and sustenance, uses which are protected by treaties signed with the United States government. This region is also home to the Kakagan Bad River Sloughs, a wetland of international importance and an area that has some of the last wild rice beds on the Great Lakes. Right now is the beginning of the wild rice harvest for tribal members, which is a practice that has sustained the band and the band has maintained for generations in their sacred homeland. And so today, as the wild rice is about to be harvested, the band is here to challenge the permits and approvals that the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources has issued to Enbridge Energy to construct the proposed Line 5 pipeline project. This proposed reroute project is a new 41-mile pipeline construction project that will go directly around and entirely upstream of the Bad River Band's reservation. Currently, the Line 5 pipeline goes through the reservation, and there is a federal district court order holding, in part, that Enbridge is operating that pipeline in trespass. But this proposed reroute is not a solution. The reroute project would be constructed by digging trenches or by explosive blasting through hundreds of waterways and wetlands. Parts of the reroute project would be constructed using a method called horizontal directional drilling, or HDD, which drills the pipe directly under a waterway. DNR authorized this project under chapters 281 and 30 of the Wisconsin statutes, despite missing baseline information about the areas the project would impact. Without that baseline information, DNR cannot make the required wetland permitting decisions about environmental impacts, about significant adverse impacts to wetland functional values, or whether the mitigation is adequate. Similarly, DNR cannot make the required waterway permitting decisions, which require considerations of the public interest and fact-specific determinations on impacts to hydrology. The band will present testimony that demonstrates the lack of baseline information and data on the region, as well as testimony on how each of the construction methods, trenching, blasting, and HDD, will have both immediate and long-term impacts on wetlands and waterways. The band's testimony will also show how these impacts will affect plant and animal life, cultural resources, and the hydrological systems these wetlands and waterways are connected to. First, you will hear from Bad River Band Tribal Chairman Robert Blanchard. He will explain the importance of the region to the band and the cultural resources at stake. Then you will hear from Mashkazibi Natural Resources Director Naomi Tillison. Director Tillison and the MNRD team is experienced in evaluating projects that impact the Bad River Band and the reservation. And they have been evaluating the potential impacts from the Line 5 reroute project for the last 5 years and have commented extensively on the project to state and federal agencies. Director Tillison and MNRD staff have also been actively involved in permitting and monitoring of Enbridge projects on the reservation that utilize similar proposed best management practices as the reroute, which have resulted in adverse impacts. Next, you will hear from Dr. John Bratton, who is a senior science officer at Limnotech. He is an expert in groundwater interactions, flows, remediation, and discharge. Dr. Bratton will testify that the extent of groundwater impacts from the project are mischaracterized, and that the proposed construction methods, such as explosive blasting and horizontal directional drilling, can have significant adverse impacts on area hydrology. Dr. Bratton will also testify that some of these impacts cannot be restored, such as the destruction of seeps and springs, bedrock fractures, and aquifer breaches. We will then call Noah Greenberg, who is a senior water resources scientist and regulatory specialist at Brightwater Engineers. Mr. Greenberg will testify that construction impacts will result in a change in soil conditions, which can contribute to erosion and increase runoff into wetlands and waterways. He will also testify that the reroute will impact water quality throughout all phases of the project, from drilling fluid releases that happen in construction, all the way to routine pipeline maintenance that will change the topography and water flow of the area. Finally, you will hear from Alice Thompson. Ms. Thompson is a wetland expert who has been in the field for almost 30 years and has worked extensively in the Bad River watershed for over 10 years. Ms. Thompson will testify that wetland data and baseline information is missing, and the extent of wetlands impacted are underestimated for the reroute. She will also testify that the proposed restoration and mitigation efforts are inadequate because they do not account for the full scope of impacts and cannot restore the functional values of these wetlands. You will hear from DNR and Enbridge about the numerous conditions in the permit, 250 for the wetland and waterway permit, and 231 for the water quality certification. But the number of conditions alone are not enough to protect this area from significant adverse impacts. And even if all the conditions are met, the reroute project cannot comply with wetland and waterway permitting standards. You will also hear from DNR and Enbridge about the number of documents prepared, the number of pages dedicated to the final environmental impact statement and its attachments. But the page count does not disguise the lack of baseline information either. Without knowing the extent of how interconnected the water is here in this region, or how highly valued these wetlands are, you cannot fully explain how bad the impacts can be. But the Bad River Band does. The Bad River Band knows. And the band is here taking a stand to protect this region, which is full of history, of cultural places, of traditional places, and of sacred places. And if something happens to this region, the band has nowhere else to go. It's the band's homeland. These project impacts are not unavoidable, and they are not acceptable under the state's wetland and waterway laws. Once you've heard the evidence, you can set aside DNR's approval for this project. Thank you.